Okay, this is a short, I think it's going to be a short video. And it's a kind of follow-up to the last one, which was what happens when the fool meets the hanged man. And so we've got the hanged man handily on top here. And I realised after I'd finished the video and posted it that I had forgotten to mention the number, because this is number 12. And so if I say to you the number 12, you'd probably think of 12 months. And so 12 months equals 1 year. And so in its own way, the hanged man represents a complete cycle. You've got the beginning, the middle, and the end. We've also got 12 signs of the zodiac, and that represents a complete cycle as well. Beginning, middle, and end of the early stages, more developed areas or more developed portions, and then finishing things up. And maybe it represents youth, middle age, and old age as well, that when you come to the end of the cycle, there's wisdom and there's experience, but there's also maybe fatigue, you're tired, you're bored, you've had enough and you want to get on to the next thing. And so maybe with the hanged man, because it's the number 12 and it represents a complete cycle, maybe with this one, the focus is or should be on looking back to see what has worked, what didn't work. Maybe looking back so you can fix up things that didn't work out the way you wanted them to. And maybe there's a little bit of darkness connected with this card as well, because you're finishing things up, so you haven't reached a new beginning yet that we'll get with the death card of the number 1, for instance. But because you're still in the old cycle and finishing things up, you haven't reached a new one yet. And so you get the idea that there's darkness before there is a new bright light when you begin the new cycle. So that's something I wanted to mention about the hanged man that may or may not be important or relevant in any particular reading. And that got me thinking about times when, let's say you do a reading for somebody and the next day or a couple of days later, you're thinking back about what you said and what the cards were that came up in the reading. And you may well relate to this, because I know for me there were times when I would think, I could have said that, and I didn't. And I wish I had said that, because it was really, that would have been good to have said at that particular point in the reading. You know what I mean? So, and I would begin to think, it would have been an awful lot better if I'd explained this card or this word, or if I'd said this about this particular card. But I think I want to tell you, as I used to tell me at a certain point, relax. Because it's one thing to go over and think about what you might have said, but if you start beating yourself up and beginning to doubt and thinking that it wasn't a very good reading because you didn't say this, you have to remember that there are 2 people involved in the reading, or maybe there's more than 2. And at that time, you have to trust that you said all that could be said. Because if you'd said the thing you thought of a couple of days later, it may be that the person asking the question would not have understood what you were getting at, or they would have misunderstood what you said or what you meant. And so it's one thing a couple of days later, under other circumstances, to think about what you could have said. But that's 2 days later. At the time of the reading, there was you and there was the other person. There was the cards that came up, and there were the thoughts that came into your mind at that time. And you have to trust that they were the best thoughts you could have had at that moment. So if you find that you think you're not very good because 2 days later you think you could have done it better, that's kind of a road to nowhere. And you really ought to get off it. And just not bother thinking along those lines. Because the thing is, if your starting point is that you're going to explain the tarot to other people and you'll do readings for them, but you also want to learn for yourself as much as you can. And if one of your priorities is learning from every time you look at a card or every time you do a reading, you can't complain about that. That's really, really good. And if you think of it, if you learn one thing every day, that's 365 things you've learned every year. And who in the world can say that they learn more than 300 things in any particular year? I think hardly anybody. But I think people who read tarot cards can say that, and it means a lot. So it's partly the because I forgot to mention this about the Hanged Man, but I realised afterwards that some people I tend to say don't mix astrology and the tarot and keep them separate. And I think what I mean is don't translate one set of symbolism into the other, especially if you're not that sure about things, so that you can talk about the king of a particular suit, and you know about kings and what they're like and what they're capable of, and the strengths and the weaknesses of kings, and the strengths and the weaknesses of, let's say, the suit of coins or the suit of cups, and you know that. But if you start talking and translating and saying, okay, well, this particular card, this is an Aries man, you know, and so this card appears in the past, so you had dealings with this Aries man. And the thing is, if you're not sure about what Aries is like, you're asking for trouble, because the person can say, well, what's an Aries like? And you think, well, not quite sure. Well, let's say an Aries man has a bad temper. And then the person says, well, this fellow didn't have a bad temper at all. In fact, he was the opposite. He was a really sweet individual. And so you can find yourself getting into trouble if you talk astrology, but you're not actually sure what things mean. Because the person could say, well, there was a man in the past, but he was a Virgo. He wasn't an Aries. So it makes you, the reader, look bad, because it's like you're saying you're giving the wrong information. So at the same time, this thing that in a horoscope, that's a horoscope with the 12 houses. Okay, and I think you can see that, basically. So this line across the middle is the horizon, and this is sunrise, and that's sunset. And so this is noon up here, and this down here is midnight, and this relates to the Hanged Man card. I think I drew this diagram last time. That's the horizon, that's the fourth house cusp. And that has a particular meaning. So, and the reason I'm talking about this is, if you feel that you want to look at astrology, I'm going to put a website address on screen, and it's www.astrologyinaction.org, and it's a site that I put together, and you'll find there's a course that I put together, and you find excerpts from most of the sections. There's about 55 sections in the course, and I've given you 5, 7, 8 minutes of each section. So if you want to look at astrology, take a look at astrologyinaction.org and see what you find there, because it's quite good. And that's it. So mainly this one is about a little bit extra on the Hanged Man. Don't beat yourself up if you think later that you could have done a better reading. Maybe you could, but if your decision is you're going to learn from the experience, you know, you're the best that that there is, because your starting point is the best that you can be, best that you can have. Okay, not sure how long this is. I looked at the clock and it said 8 and a half minutes. So that's it for this. Next is going to be when the Fool meets the Death card on his voyage through the major trump.